let's go ahead and get into the 7 minimum categories. Now, this is very specific because this is the 7 minimum categories of documentation that basically determines the strength of the case. So let's walk through these categories. Now, there can be more, but these are the bare minimum. In other words, that's like when I talk to my attorneys, this is the bare bones where we start. We go, well, where's the starting point? Is this a good case to start from? Or is this not even a good case to start from? So that's obviously where we need to start. So here it is. Number 1 is mechanism of injury. Obviously, we have to have a cause and effect relationship. Somebody's got to be responsible. That has to be there. That's major. Number 2. Now, there's another category here that I'm going to leave out, but it's not a major. It's called injury magnifiers. But it's not major. It happens a lot of times, but we don't need injury magnifiers. That's not a major. Now, number 2 is subjective findings at MMI. Now, this becomes real important when I say MMI. That's where the injury awards start increasing significantly, is when there's permanent impairments at MMI. Let's face it, somebody gets hurt and injured, they get back to normal. That's not much of an injury award. Everything's fine and dandy. It's the person who has permanent problems the rest of their life. And can it be objectified? Can it be documented to prove it? Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to show that to you right now. So the next category is subjective at MMI. MMI is based on the science of the 3 phases of healing. It's not the doctor's opinion. This is science. And one of the major components of documentation relative to the doctor, and I teach this all the time, I said, you don't want your opinion. Everything we want to do needs to be third-party trusted factors. We don't want us to be questioned. We want to use and establish what's already well known. That way it can't be challenged, or can't be challenged with very much veracity. So subjective findings at MMI. Okay. Now, MMI means now you have a permanent problem. That's why this becomes important, MMI. And that's where, we'll see shortly how that translates into the injury awards, or does not. Now, you'll see on this sheet, it says primary evidence, secondary evidence, and number of categories. This becomes very important relative to the strength of the case. So let me run through all 7 first, and then let's come back and go into this. Because remember, I call this horizontal and vertical documentation. That's what's going to determine the strength of the case. So number 2 is subjective evidence. In other words, how much, but we'll go into detail. Number 3 is hybrid evidence. How much? Number 4 is objective evidence. All of these are very important. You don't have one of these categories, it significantly is going to hurt the case. You're essentially not going to have a strong case. And that's what I would tell my attorneys. And if I showed up and we didn't have, any hybrid evidence, or we didn't have any subjective evidence at MMI, and we had or we had no objective evidence, I would just I'd show my attorney and I'd say, this is a weak case. I'd just settle for what you can and move on. Go to the next one. I would not, in other words, when I say weak and strong, I'm talking about willing to go to court and tell the story to support it. That's what I say. In other words, willing to take the time and energy to go to court. That's what I call a strong case. Do you have all these categories? Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to go to court and put these together when you're missing one of these 7 components. So we said number 4 is objective evidence at MMI. Number 5 is MMI. Now that becomes very important again, because that's, according to the AMA guides for impairment, that's the point at which you can call it an impairment. That's when the patient's not going to heal anymore. It's over. That's it. It's permanent. That becomes a major issue. That takes us to number 6, an impairment rating. So it's either an impairment rating or the impairment indexes. We're going to go into the importance and relativeness of this. But essentially, the personal injury case, the value for the injury award is essentially based on, was there a permanent impairment and did it cause permanent pain or restrictions the rest of that person's life? That's the pinnacle of the injury award. I mean, let's face it, if there's no permanent impairment and there's no pain or restrictions with that person the rest of their life, that's not a high valuable case. Okay, now it's good for the patient, not good for the injury award. Okay, so that's number 6. Number 7 is the prognosis and need for future care. That becomes very important because that's typically that's number 1, it's one of the injury awards, and it's typically the largest of the injury awards.